You had mentioned, or you alluded to the sort of the fact that the left has been unable to cohere any sort of institutional or organizational presence that can actually
Right.
reach the broader working class. And in the aftermath of the Bernie movement, we saw some sort of tentatives in that direction, but they all fell apart. They didn't really work
Right.
out. But at the
Right.
same time, public opinion seems to have converged on a kind of broadly social democratic array of stances, right? Like
Mhm.
whatever happened to Bernie's movement, the platform that he was putting forward does seem to have percolated down, and people who may not be involved in politics at all have sort of internalized it as kind of
Right.
ideally what they would like to see.
Right.
And this applies to a certain extent even to some sector of the MAGA wing of the Republican electorate,
Mhm.
which seems to be noticeably more pro-labor, anti-war than the old Republican base. And as Trump's popularity collapses, as this sector of his base kind of becomes increasingly disillusioned, and that seems to really be gaining steam at this moment, in the aftermath of that Iran debacle and
Mhm.
the Epstein thing and all that. Um, it seems like there might be fertile ground here for a left that is capable of reaching that sector of the working class, if it can only figure out how to communicate with them in a language that they'll tolerate.
Mhm.
Um, and this is sort of the issue with treating the Democrats as always, well, I guess we got to vote for the Democrats at the end of the day, because it seems to slide the left into this unhealthy alliance with a party that then forecloses its ability to communicate
Right.
effectively with that sector of the working class that lies outside of the Democratic base.
Right.
Um, and does it make sense, in your view, for the left to participate in both Democratic and Republican politics simultaneously, kind of just to train itself to speak both languages and to try to reach both
Huh.
wings of the working class?
Well, that's interesting. Um, yeah. Let me chew on that for a second. I'll say a couple things. One is, so I start out from the premise that there is no left, right? So, and that's the big problem, right? Because there's no institutional left. Oh, but I also have a shameless plug, which is that I want to underscore that Bernie's platform in 2016 and 2020 was pretty much the Labor Party's platform for the totality of his existence. All right. So, and I feel good about that. I'm not complaining, right? I mean, I worked for Bernie both both times, um, and I also agree that in 2020, like there wasn't much traction that anything got after 2016, right? People just who had political capacity went straight from Bernie's campaign to the state alliances that they'd been part of and just got swept up in that. But yeah, I think it's true. There was more potential traction after 2020, and then the pandemic killed it, and that's what pulled the rug out from under us in South Carolina. But and it and happened to other places too. I mean, I wouldn't trust Josh Hawley as far as I could throw him with my right hand, and I'm left-handed. And I think that that's true by and large about the MAGA overtures to or the gestures toward concerns about the working class. I mean, I don't. Um, no, I think it's bullshit. I think it's all bullshit. But so I would try to. I'd be more inclined um, to ground a politics, not non-electorally, first of all, right? But trying to organize around issues, or I mean, like I said, the ballot initiatives can be a good way to connect with people and to start conversations. And I certainly agree that most working people, if or at least enough, if left to their own devices, without the bullshit, uh, would see the reason in the kind of political program that people like us would have on offer. Um, yeah, I mean, there's an anecdote about this from the second Sanders campaign about a question I had with a steel worker about what do you call the moral issues. Um, but um, I think, yeah, I think we definitely need to cultivate um, talking to people who don't already agree with us about things, right? And that means suspending the sort of religious commitments that people who understand themselves to be on the left have about how you say things and what you say, and the so-called social or cultural issues. Um, but I mean, I don't know. Like, my, I guess my fundamental view is that there is no left, and I mean, therefore, it's hard for me to think about what a left should do, right? But I know that what's got to happen is, look, yeah, what we need basically, yeah, I think we're at, or I think um, the trans-historical movement, right? I'll put it that way, is in a cadre building phase, and I think that that one of our objectives politically should be, and this is what we do in DGDI, it's our main focus, is concentrate on trying to build opportunities for doing real serious political education among working people. Um, prefer- Preferably, first of all, people in unions, not because they're better, but for the same reasons that the civil rights movement went to churches, which is that's where you could find a lot of people, right, to connect with, um, and to start trying to build an organization over time. So what that means is that it's basically saying, um, not exactly calling for, not exactly tossing in the towel, but accepting the likelihood that we aren't going to be able to turn the tide against whatever we want to call this tendency out there. Um, but that we need to find ways to sort of see if we can generate little um, lichen, maybe like in the crevices in the rocks. I mean, that can help down the road. But it just, and look, I'm 78 years old. I didn't think this was going to be the last phase of my life. So I'm not happy about it. But I'm also not going to do like Marcuse and some other people who more, I mean, recently my contemporary, but some of my contemporaries who like can look up and see that they're likely to die in a moment of colossal defeat and scurry around to try to find a magical agency that will keep that from not happening. Yeah, I got a different kind of optimism. So I don't know. What do you think? How's that sound to you, Jamal?
No, I think that's a sober assessment. And I do, Martin, want to bring forward my other question because I think it's related. You mentioned
Okay.
forming, sort of little lichens, right? Trying to build
Mhm.
cadre, et cetera. And I was a participant, as we discussed a little bit earlier, in one of those previous attempts to build cadre, which was the
Mhm.
DSA.
Right.
Um, and my analysis, and I think a lot of people's analysis of what happened in the DSA was that it became captured by very active, you know, potential cadre who
Mhm.
were just absolutely wedded to radical liberal cultural stances. That was their primary motivation in participating in politics. And they basically sabotaged and hijacked any attempt to reach out to working people on the basis of
Right.
a class first message. Um,
Mhm.
and I just wonder what concrete steps can we take when we're building cadre, because I don't think this is a DSA specific phenomenon. My experience has been,
Yeah.
an officer in my local union, um,
Mm.
and this stuff has thoroughly penetrated the
Right.
union staffers as well, right? Like,
Oh
what
yeah.
concrete
Yeah. Yeah.
steps can we take to to try to keep our cadre building efforts on the straight and narrow and prevent them from being
Right.
deviated into this kind of culture first morass?
Wow, that's a big question. And my first response is to channel my father again and say, "Well, say what you want about Stalin, but no, 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 it's not that." But No, it's a problem. Well, look, when I first heard that there'd been this flood into DSA after Bernie's campaign, from a good friend and comrade, Dino Guastella in Philly, who was a member of DSA for many years prior to that. And I said, well, yeah, that sounds like a good thing, but it also reminds me of the flood into SDS, right, in '68. And within a year, the organization was dead because people came in with at different levels, stage or degrees of political development. Some were um, working class oriented Marxists, others were a whole bunch of other stuff. So it's a problem, right? It's a problem of having the organization first, right? Of having the vessel first. A parallel is question is like um, recurring iterations of do we need a Labor Party now, right? Question. And it's interesting. I mean, the three people who were most centrally connected to the Labor Party who are still around um, all say no, that's not the way we should be thinking at this point. And I'm one of those three, right? Because the forms will emerge out of the activity, right? And there's no other way to do it, and there's no other way to avoid that problem. That, and I know it's a very real problem. I have a friend in Massachusetts who's going through this now with his own union, and another old comrade has mentioned to me a number of years ago, kind of ironically, considering that the labor movement has been drawing young people who, by rights and by their sort of natural orientation, would be more comfortable working in NGOs, but because the NGO jobs aren't there and the union jobs are, and there's a kind of fetishization of what it means to be a union staffer now. But this is true when I'm decades earlier too, like the freestanding radical who holds a staff job, basically. And it's problematic because some of them, and I don't know if you've seen this, like with staff in your union, but feel almost guilty about the collective bargaining functions because that just feels like the old labor movement, the old, white men, this, that, and the other. Um, and some of them feel that the purpose of the labor or the real mission of the labor movement is to build Black Lives Matter and stuff like that. So it's a problem. But and I hope that that the unions themselves will be able to resolve that staff problem. But from outside the unions, out of broader movement concern, what it comes down to is that you can't just align with anybody, right? And I mean, there are, and it's trial and error, right? But I mean, people have to come together around a shared vision of what it is they're trying to do. And if the shared vision is one, and this is one of the many reasons to miss Jane so much, if the shared vision is one that we didn't get into the situation overnight, we're not going to get out of it overnight, and we need a movement that's made up of people who have names and addresses and can be identified and who live in social networks, right, of other people who have names and addresses who can do things and constantly expand the base, then I don't think we should have time. Well, then I don't have time to deal with them, basically, because I think that's the only kind of politics there is now that's worth having. And I think that's another punchline of this book that began in a very different political moment. But I mean, this Potemkin leftism has like run its course now, and a tragic, frightening thing is that we've had enough people come up in this regime that they can't tell the difference between mobilizing for a demonstration and organizing and connecting with a base. and consistently think the former is indeed the latter. And that's another thing that political education is good for. Um, but it's just going to be a long, hard slog, and a lot of ugliness is going to happen. But sorry, that's another reason that it's important that there is to face up to the necessity to align with liberals about a lot of stuff, right? To try to stop the bleeding. But we also have to be politically sophisticated enough to understand what we're doing and why we're doing it, and not let it get out of hand. So I know this sounds like the little league coach who says, "Throw strikes, don't give them anything to hit." Uh, but yeah, that's but as both a coach and a player, I actually understand what those conflicting imperatives mean. So, and we have to operate like that ourselves.
Uh, as someone who didn't grow up in this country, I'm not sure I understand what they mean, but I think I got the baseball metaphor. Anyway, if I can just follow up on Jamal, part of Jamal's question there, or one of his questions, with a kind of topical thing, as it were. Maybe this is just a comment rather than a question, although I'm just curious about your thoughts. But, there's been a fair amount of excitement in certain sectors of the left, or what calls itself the left, about Zoran Mamdani, of course, recently. And I seem to recall seeing stuff a while ago, which was sort of praising him for focusing on economic issues and not talking about, for example, race so much. But then I was dispirited that recently there's this people have been drawing attention to something he says about richer and whiter neighborhoods, and then it's just one line, but he's been defending it on sort of TV shows and stuff. And then Sharma Sawant also, quite different, and she talks very explicitly about things like class warfare and the bosses are, and she's raised red flags about, she's worried that Mamdani is too eager to get along with the billionaires, whereas in fact they are our enemy. And so she'll talk in these very kind of class warfare kind of ways, but then when you look at her platform, there are whole chunks of it that are at least framed in, for example, racial terms, right? And at one point you use the phrase partial or segmented eligibility for social benefits. That's something that is a problem, right? Proposing that kind of approach, and she seems to be putting forward policies along those lines. And so it's sort of, I just find it dispiriting that we still can't seem to get away from that. And I don't know if you have any reactions or thoughts about that, but.
Oh yeah, I do. Yeah, I mean, well, in the first place, I wouldn't compare Sawant and Mamdani. I think Sawant's like a sectarian, and I don't think much of her politics. If I voted in New York City, I would vote for Mamdani. I would have voted for him in the primary too. But that said, and like I think I know his father a little bit, and his father's a great guy, very, very smart. I love his work, right? From a book that he wrote when we were both in our early 20s, even. But what gets me about it all is it would be interesting if Mamdani could be elected mayor, and he might be. And I've heard from friends overlapping, networks that there's at least a strain of Mamdani supporters who believe that this is what the new movement's going to look like. First of all, we aren't going to elect ourselves into a political movement, right? Secondly, it wasn't that long ago when de Blasio was Mamdani, right? I mean, they're different, and in a lot of ways, Mamdani's a more attractive candidate. He's probably sharper politically, so forth and so on. On the other hand, de Blasio was more institutionally connected. What happened, right? On Wall Street closed ranks against him. Even more recently, Brandon Johnson, who I know very well from up in Chicago, great guy, got elected, and he's got a better institutional base in the Chicago Teachers Union than Mamdani had, and he's been catching hell too. So it's frustrating, right? I wrote a piece a long time ago in response to a couple of jerk-offs, in which I began talking about the cargo cult, right? I mean, phenomenon, and how much the left, or what calls itself the left, is taken up with that, right? I mean, claiming just over the horizon, out to sea. You can't quite see it yet, but I can sense the outline of a ship that's coming in, bringing a magical cargo. And like this is what we've been doing since. Yeah, I'm almost inclined to say they now, but what people who occupy the cultural space that the left would occupy in the U.S. if there were one have been doing this since Jesse Jackson in 1984. What if? What if? What if? What if? What if? And so I don't know. I mean, yeah, like I said, I would vote from Mamdani. It's going to be interesting to see how it turns out, but 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 that's like the opposite of the way to build a movement, right? Well, and see, this is a fight, we had in the Labor Party for the totality of its existence, but people wanted to rush to run candidates, and our position was, no, you build a movement and run candidates from a position of strength, because as I see it, the electoral realm is where you go to consolidate victory, to consolidate institutionally victories that you've won on the plane of social movement organizing. So, but the other approach is like the shortcut one, and it's frankly a dilettante's politics, I think. That said, I wish him well. I'd like to see him win, but my expectations are low.
Right, thank you for that. We've been going for a while. We should probably start to move towards a close.
Okay, sounds good to me.
Hef and Jamal, did you have any last questions you wanted to ask or comments or anything?
No, not particularly.
Okay. I had one thing that I thought might make a nice way to
Okay,
to
good.
wrap up. Partly because it could serve as a little pep talk for us, which is that it seemed to me a recurring theme in the pieces that we read in both of them was that ideology plays an important role. That is that one thing that has hampered what might have been the left, or what might have been a left, depending over this period that you're looking at in especially the later article, is that they don't have the right concepts available, as it were, or they're not using the right concept. They're not talking about class and class struggle and capitalism and so on. They're using all these, and you were talking about this earlier about homeowner populism, or about race, or et cetera, et cetera. And you also, in a kind of call to action bit, you kind of also talk about both organizing and political education, which you've also just been talking about. So it sounds like one important function of political education then is simply to try to re-equip people with the right categories and frameworks and concepts for thinking about things in the right way, and which which is, I mean, at the moment, what this organization is mostly doing, I guess, would fall under the heading of political education, and so I'm just sort of hoping that that means that that's a thought we can take with us, as it were, into.
Yeah, no, absolutely, man. I mean, that's huge, right? That's really huge, and I mean, and the things that come along with that, right? Like I was on a panel at the American Anthropological Association shortly after Obama was elected, and there's a panel on Obama, and there was a guy, I think he's from Australia, about my age, leftist, right, of a new left sort, who at one point I said something about like we need a disciplined political organization, and he said, "Oh, I don't know, that sounds like a vanguard party, and where did that get us last time around?" I said, well, yeah, and where did not thinking like that get you, right? But you know what I mean? I mean, so I'm not. Obviously, I'm not calling for party building, but what I do think is that we're at a point where we need to create the constituency for the kind of politics that we want to have, and as Russell Jacoby said in a nice book 25 years ago, actually. What happens when a left retreats from embracing a vision that the world could be other than it is qualitatively? Is that the liberals don't have anything to define themselves against, right? So the liberals will slip farther and farther right, and we'll slip into the space that the liberals held, claiming that we're small d, but democratic, and can't have a larger and having a larger political vision is somehow opposed to building a popular movement. But no, we need exactly the opposite. It's time for us to turn those tables around, and people respond to it. I mean, we do trainings at DJDI reunions, and people respond. So keep it up, I'd say. The more the merrier.